The big talking point of the weekend, and that is, of course, Max Verstappen on George Russell, the 10-second penalty.
Max Verstappen's red miss moment could cost him everything. Check this video out.
The fact that it all boiled over, but it was a sequence of events, Karun, that led to this. And it started pretty much with the safety car restart and being the only one to go onto a set of new hards, and he just could not believe it. What are we on the hards? Should he have stayed out on the softs? And then from there, it kind of spiraled out of control.
Yeah, I think, he was surprised to go on the hard tyre. They had no choice because they were on that 3-stop. So I feel like he was surprised, but then Max was told by GP, look, we have no choice. We had no choice, rather. This is the only thing we could do. So I think that was fine. But then the consequence of the hard tyre meant that he had that snap of oversteer on the restart. He's lost the position to Charles. He's annoyed that Charles has bumped into him. He had a bit of a rant on the radio about that. Then George bumped him. And actually, I just listened back to that section of the race, that sort of 10-minute bit of team radio, all through. And weirdly, as soon as George hits him, Max immediately comes to the radio and says, that'll be a penalty. He's hit me. So he immediately says George should have a penalty. Now, Red Bull's response, which for me was really confusing, even watching at home, because they asked him to give up the place. And I obviously didn't have the benefit of the onboards because I hadn't scanned my QR code that Crofty had told me to on the Sky Sports app.
Shocking.
But I was just watching. The normal coverage, and to me, I looked and I thought, no, he's been tagged. He doesn't need to give the place up. Why are they asking him to give the place up? It was confusing, so then the red mist is down, right? And what he did was just wrong. And I'm glad, somewhat surprised, I have to say, to hear him come out and apologize, because we hadn't had that before from Max, so the fact that he has, I think, is good. Because it's indefensible, right? What he did, slowing down, effectively giving George the message in the cockpit that I'm slowing down, you go past, and then he accelerates. He actually gets slightly back on the throttle as well, if you listen to the onboard, which is, clearly unacceptable. He's come out, apologized, chapter over.
You could feel the tension build from the moment Max got boxed into that hard tyre call. Then came the contact, the frustration, and that puzzling team order. It was like a perfect storm, one mistake triggering another. But Max didn't hide behind excuses. He stepped up and apologised. That moment said more about his evolution than any race win could.
Chaps, it's not over though, is it? Because we'll all go to Canada and we'll start asking questions about it all over again. And I think the biggest legacy in terms of how it affects Max is those 3 penalty points on his license for this 12-month period. And he's got 2 races now to really behave himself. And I think the 10-second penalty was right, because it was a chunk of points that got taken away. And that to me is damaging and therefore is a proper punishment. But it's those 3 penalty points, puts him on 11 now. 1 more penalty point, he gets a race ban. He's got 2 races until his next points come off. So I think the stewards have done a very good job there. And we'll ask questions about that. Max, are you going to change your approach now for the next 2 races? Are you going to try and keep out of trouble? Are you going to try and keep a bit calm? It was that red mist that descended on Max. And like you, I'm glad that he's come out and said, look, it shouldn't have happened. I apologise to the team. Shouldn't have done it. That shows a mature Max Verstappen, and we want to see that. But we also want to see a mature Max Verstappen on the track and not doing things like that, because he is a better driver than this sort of thing. And he keeps getting remembered for this sort of thing. And I don't want to see that for him.
No, let's just play devil's advocate again, if I could, with this one. George Russell, straight at his old nemesis, George Russell. It had to be George, didn't it? Saying afterwards, bad example to young kids. And Max was initially fairly belligerent, wasn't he? He wasn't having any of it in Rachel's interview, saying, bring some tissues next time. But then he softened. And I wonder why he softened overnight. But if you look at some of the reaction, though, from the fans. Now, I don't know if this is in reaction to what Nico was saying about the black flag, but just a few questions we've had sent in, d1git4l.g.ore, whatever your handle is. If Albon got 10 seconds, why did Verstappen also get 10 when that was so dangerous? Gunfrahan 2, why did Max get disqualified in a race ban when he clearly purposely drove and rammed into Russell? Tom Cannon 5106, 2 examples of using your car as a weapon. Baku, this is quite pertinent. Baku 2017, Seb gets a 10-second stop and go. And Barcelona 2025, Max only gets 10 seconds. Can you explain why? Let's go to you, Karun, on that first point. Do you agree with Croft? Do you think that 10 seconds was enough?
The 10-second penalty hit hard, but the real punishment is the 3 penalty points. It backs Max into a corner for 2 races with no room for instinctive moves. That's not how he operates. He's a high-risk, high-reward driver. And let's be honest, part of F1's drama comes from racers like Max pushing those limits. Now, the stewards are sending a message, but are they also muting the very fire that fuels champions?
Do you think there's a case, or was there a case for a black flag?
No, I think there's a case to discuss and debate the black flag, but I think if I look at, what happened, the speed it happened, where it happened, how it happened, and the consequences, which I know the stewards say, we don't look at the consequences, but really they do. I think you have to. George carried on, did he? And I thought it was right. I agree with Crofty. I think the stewards did a good job. I also think the stewards did a good job of saying it would have been no further action. They clarified that it would have been no further action for the turn 1 thing, saying that Max was in the right about not wanting to give up the place and the team were wrong. And I thought 10 seconds was fine. It's one of these things which you have to look at how it's going to impact him. And in the end, the black flag would have cost him another point, Simon. So I think actually Crofty's point about the 3 penalty points is actually more important, because the 1 point in the championship is, okay, it's not a big deal. So I think it was right what was awarded to him.
The thing about the Sebastian Vettel moment in Baku is that Seb turned into Lewis. He actually adjusted his steering behind the safety car, remember, and bang wheels with Lewis. Max was very clever, actually, in the way that he hit George. He almost allowed George to hit him by not turning his steering to the left. His steering angle is actually dead straight when they make contact. So the stewards will have looked at that as well. He's not making, as it were, a deliberate move towards George, but he's not getting out of the way of George. The end result is exactly the same. Is he using his car as a weapon? Yes, he's putting his car where George is going to hit him, but he's not driving straight into him, if that makes sense on that one. And I think that's why there's a difference between that Baku penalty for Seb and the Barcelona penalty for Max. But I do think Lando Norris summed it up beautifully in the cooldown room podcast. Yeah, I did that before. And we're thinking, really? When? Yes, Mario Kart. Yeah, brilliant, Lando. We've all done it on Mario Kart. Maybe that's the trouble.
Max didn't force contact. He invited it. That's a psychological edge, not just racecraft. The straight steering, the refusal to yield, it's a message. He won't give up track position unless it's taken from him. That's elite level decision making under pressure.
But you know what this reminded me of, Crofty, was Mexico last year, where you remember that thing with Lando and Max, turn 4, Max felt that he was, aggrieved by what had happened down there in corner cutting or whatever. And then he just had this ridiculous lunge down the inside of Lando, didn't he? Into that left-hander of the S's, and got a penalty for it, which was right. And that's what this reminded me of. It was just this, red mist comes down, bosh, I'm going to do something completely irrational, not thinking logically. And if you look at what happened, he did this at turn 5. And again, when you watch the radio back, he's gone in, driven into George, and then somehow between turn 5 and turn 12, he's sort of calmed down, had a word with himself and gone, oh, that was naughty, you shouldn't have done that. And he moves aside and lets George pass. There was I've just listened back, there was no radio communication from the pit wall asking him to move aside at turn 12. So he's had this explosion of rage, calmed himself down in 7 corners, and then sort of settled. So Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Is those moments of, what was the phrase you used, Simon? He unleashed the raging lion or something like that. After
Yeah. Yeah,
you know, that's what the lesson's got to be for Max out of this, isn't it? Is how you don't have those moments.
I suppose to George's point though, your boy Kush is karting. Yeah, what does he think about seeing a quadruple world champion do that though?
He was screaming penalty, penalty, penalty at the TV.
He wants to be a steward.
And then I went to drop him off at school on Monday, and the head teacher was at the front door. And the first thing the head teacher said, "Kush, what did you think of the race?" "Penalty for Max," was the first thing he said as he then walked away from me.
Yeah.
So yes, that's what kids.
But he drove his heart out. That's the thing for Max. He was driver of the day, wasn't he? He drove his heart out on that 3-stopper. He probably should have finished on the podium, but because of the sequence of events, didn't happen. It doesn't excuse it boiling over. Of course it doesn't. But maybe that's the point. He was driving such a good race, and it seemed like such a good strategy. They got lucky with the safety car, put the wrong tyres on. Then they're coming together with Charles. Then they're coming together with George. Then the deliberate crash into George, and the wrong call, obviously before that by GP. And it was just all of that, and it just went 0 to 100, didn't he? Quick one from Llama Worm 2K11. Conspiracy theory one here. It is a good one.
You can really see how Max rides the edge between genius and chaos. That raw aggression, it's what's made him a world champion. But moments like this show how thin the line is between instinct and implosion. Turn 5 wasn't about overtaking. It was about frustration boiling over. Still, the fact that he chose to back off by turn 12, that says something. He's still learning to control the fire, and that's what makes him fascinating to watch.
Did Max intentionally drop points so he can trigger his performance release clause in the summer and take George's seat at Mercedes in time for the reg change, where the Mercedes engine will likely make the best car for 2026, while also leaving his arch rival George Russell with Red Bull as his only option, forcing him to have to drive a car that nobody can drive except for Max, leaving Russell stuck fighting against the car at the back of the grid like Yuki? What do you think of that?
That's a brilliant conspiracy theory, and from the grassy mole, that makes or knoll even that makes a lot of sense. It really does. Christian Horner is saying that the stories that Max has this, escape clause that gets triggered by Austria is complete and utter nonsense. Yeah, that's not my words. That's Christian Horner's words. So
that means it's probably there, isn't it? Like,
yeah, exactly. So take of that what you will. We can only go by what we're told on this one. Aston Martin are actually chasing, I'm told, hard for George Russell, and would quite like his services for the future. So Red Bull might not be the only option there for George. Tell you what, I'm going to stand alongside on the grassy knoll and do this one. If Lance Stroll can't race in Canada, could Max Verstappen get that one race ban and take part in Le Mans? Do you think? Is there anything he could do to do that? Because Felipe Drugovich will replace Lance Stroll, therefore there'll be a seat going in Le Mans, and he wants to do Le Mans. Come on, we might as well play pie in the sky conspiracy theories.
I mean, what's going to happen here is you're playing with fire, Crofty, because this is going to get taken out of context and put on all of these on the website.
I'm staying away from this.
If you know what you're doing.
Look, I'm standing on the grassy knoll. My tongue is very much in my cheek, but if it happens, you heard it here first. This is the benefit of hindsight, right?
Let's not forget, Max is a student of the sport's politics as much as he is of the racing. A potential move timed right before new regulations is the kind of long game champions play. His father, Jos, has hinted before that Max's future isn't tied to loyalty, it's tied to performance. If Mercedes is gearing up to dominate in 2026, Max needs to be in that conversation. This isn't just about one title. It's about legacy, control, and being in the right place before the reset. That kind of thinking is what separates the greats, and Max knows it.
Just finish this one, though, but with this beef, with the two nemesises, What's the plural of nemesis? Nemesis is probably nemesis, nemesi. George in Abu Dhabi 2024 to F1 TV. He cannot deal with adversity. Whenever anything is not going his way, he lashes out with unnecessary anger and borderline violence. We've seen it with Brazil in the past with Ocon. You saw it in 21 with Lewis and Mexico with Lando. And yet, after Imola, it felt like George was offering Max an olive branch, wasn't it? Going, that was an unbelievable move that he pulled on Oscar Piastri, just as you think they might be, getting to a point where they can go out for dinner with each other again. Something like this happens. What does it actually mean, do you think, in reality for the relationship between the pair? And does it matter, Karun?
I think George sort of batted it away, didn't he? Towards the end of that interview with Rachel, saying, look, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. We've got bigger problems. We need to understand why we weren't as quick, etc., etc. And I think the fact that Max has come out and apologized for, I think, the first time ever. We didn't hear that after Mexico. We didn't hear that in the past and the incidents with Lewis and things like that. I think it'll mean that this actually will take the sting out of what could have escalated. I think the sting will have been taken out of it a bit.
The thing is, Max is a character that wears his heart on his sleeve in this sort of way. He gets very het up if things aren't going his way. I don't want that to be his legacy in Formula One. I want us to remember things like Imola, where he goes around the outside of the leader and takes the lead. But he needs to get it under control because he can't afford to keep doing it in the races. It will catch up with him eventually on that one, and it did catch up with him on Sunday. But this is the most mature we've seen Max after an incident like this, and that, I think, is to his credit.
Yeah, I agree with you. Plus, also what we're seeing this year is just a different level of driving, I think, from Max. When you take it, to just take this as an isolated incident, everything that he has done so far this year is to prove that he is a magnificent quadruple world champion. It's a shame that you have these things that can be seen as a bit of a stain, but he's that kind of driver. It's either brilliance or we get a moment like this. What does it mean, though, can I just watch one on the subject of Red Bull before we move on to McLaren and what it means for the top? Yuki Tsunoda.
This moment could have escalated, but Max handled it better than before. That's a sign of a champion learning from his past. Still, the pressure of racing at the top is immense. The real test is how consistently Max keeps his cool moving forward. His talent is undeniable, but mental resilience is what separates legends from the rest. This season proves he's on the right path, but there's no room for complacency.